This is the Launch Station, the only place you need to look for all things onboarding, implementation, and customer success. Tune in for insights from industry experts every week.
Hey everyone, welcome to yet another episode of the Launch Station. Today we're going to be talking about accountability, why you need it from onboarding through adoption. And we have a special guest today. We have Jan Young, who is a top 50 customer success influencer. And she's currently a principal consultant with the Success League, which offers CSM and leadership training, customer success program assessments, and consulting services in CS. She started her career in project management, moved to marketing with Paramount Pictures, and she's had a pretty long stint in customer success, starting at Ubiquity and MediaMorph, from before when customer success became a thing. And she came into CS through sales and account management. For 5 years before joining the Success League, she did her own consulting with founders and startups, and she's been a passionate influencer in the CS world. So, Jan, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
So you have an interesting background in, theater, playwriting. So if there's one classic play that you'd like to direct, do an adaptation of, which one would it be?
I'm sure I should say something like Waiting for Godot or something like that. In truth, I've kind of refocused my energies to thinking about workflows, and it's really very creative about that. My favorite sort of screenwriter director would be Charlie Kaufman. I don't know if you're familiar with Being John Malkovich or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, but really now in terms of my writing, where I focus my energies is I write blog articles about customer success, and I think about workflows, in onboarding and throughout the customer journey, and that's really how I like to geek out these days.
That's interesting. All right, cool. So we'll dive into the main topic for the day. Let's start with how you define accountability. So if you were the CSM onboarding a customer, how would you set those expectations, or how does accountability work for you?
And that's a really important point in the journey when you're doing that introduction and you're trying to set up that partnership, right? And so I would say really my favorite way is introducing a success plan that incorporates SMART goals in the kickoff meeting. Because when you're doing that, you have your executive stakeholders there talking about why they purchased the product, what their goals are, how they want to use the product, how they envision it. And then you also have everybody who is responsible for doing the implementation there, hearing basically their boss tell them why it's so important. And so now this implementation is more than just an annoyance. Is actually something that they need to incorporate into their day job because their boss has told them it's important, right? But then the other thing about it is it helps to incorporate how they perceive value, how they're going to achieve value, what their timelines are going to be. That's when you really get the opportunity for that buy-in and that partnership. And you're all there together agreeing on timelines and tasks and who's responsible, all to achieve the goals that they have over the next 3 to 6 months, how they're going to achieve that value. I mean, it's that conversation right there that's key. That's how then the CSM gets to sort of have an excuse to follow up with the executive stakeholder and say, hey, this is how things are progressing. But that's also how like the onboarding manager then can sort of keep people in line saying, hey, we've all agreed to this. This is what it takes. This is our partnership in this, and everybody gets to be aligned that way. And I feel like that's how you make that sort of emotional connection, as well as you're connecting it to all of the, project management next steps and things that intellectually that you need to do as well. So that's kind of how my favorite way to go about it.
Perfect. So, I think some of these, hit us harder when we hear it with a story. So I wonder if you can recall an incident where it sort of dawned upon you that, keeping folks accountable is really making onboarding a breeze, and that they're really helping you nail this critical juncture in the partnership with a customer.
I'm trying to think of something in particular, like if I, when I used a success plan or something like that, and there's nothing really hit me in terms of success plans, just because that always seems to go so smoothly and you don't remember the stories of when it was fine, right? Like that's when it's like it all melds in together. What came to mind when you asked me before about sort of a memorable incident, there was a team that was more along the lines of professional services that I had managed at one point. And this is before the consulting. And literally every meeting that they had, this was across, like I managed the West Coast, and across every account, every meeting was just painful. They just complained each time. And what we did instead was really about kind of a story about partnership and how we changed the process where each sprint, first of all, there wasn't any testing. So we introduced user acceptance testing first. And then we changed the structure of the meetings so that now the meetings started off with getting sign off on each item that had just gone through the sprint to ensure that there was acceptance. And once we got that buy-in, then we had to check, we checked it off and we didn't revisit it again. Whereas before it kept getting reopened. Whereas now, like we would sign off and say, okay, we both agree that this is working fine. Then we would move to the next one, troubleshoot it, whatever, sign off, great. We'd kept going through that. Then we would decide what's going into the next sprint. And then after that, if there were other issues that they wanted to discuss, we usually didn't have much time, maybe 5 minutes or so. And so then they could, complain about how they wanted the button blue. And it's like, okay, great. Tell us more about the business impact of needing the button to be blue, sort of thing, right? But it was through changing that process where you could be productive and making certain that you had that mutual buy-in and acceptance, that we were able to then get to the next stage and the next step and the next sprint together. And whereas before all they did was complain, all of a sudden now, even though we had changed against their will the structure of these meetings because they wanted to complain before, they were actually much happier and they felt like there was much more progress. And I guess for me, what I learned from that is that you can't let the customer take over the process. You have to guide them through it, and you have to make certain that there's a partnership there where you're both signing off on it, and then you've agreed that you can move on to the next step. And so I think in a sense, that's a story of accountability, but it's also a story about partnership, which I think are very closely aligned. So yeah, that was something that felt really good, to actually go through account by account and basically turn them all around. That was, it felt magical, to be able to do that.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is when you do have that partnership with the customer, it does feel good. Everyone feels good, and you get to progress in the way that you can together. So it is important to structure it in that way, the process.
Makes sense. And you talked about partnership. You also talked about your company setting the path or the way you want to run your process. Would you say onboarding managers, other than playing the project manager role, also need to be conscious about setting the pace, sort of carrying the right momentum, till sales things are progressing with a certain intensity? Do you think it's also the responsibility of the onboarding manager to carry the momentum through all the way to adoption?
Absolutely. And I think that's something that's important in the sales process, to prepare the customer for the onboarding stages and to be committed to it. Too often the customer will say, oh, I have these other priorities. I have my day job. I have, anything else can come in between what they need to do to onboard. And I've seen even recently in working with a company that has sort of annual contracts, and a customer can eat up 4, 5, 6 months for something that only needs to take 1 month or less to accomplish because of other priorities. And the problem with that is then at the end, then they say, hey, I've only got 6 months left on this annual contract. I want some money back, or, whatever. And so then you end up giving them an extension instead of money back, but you're still losing money either way. And that's all because of allowing the customer to dictate the timeline. Whereas instead, before they sign on the dotted line, they need to commit to what the timeline is. That's why you do that success plan with the executive stakeholder, saying this is what our timeline is going to be, because we're going to achieve these other goals using the product by such and such date. And then they have to prioritize and work through the onboarding process on top of their day job or whatever it is that they're doing, if they're not, if they don't consider this as part of their day job. And so, yeah, I mean, I think if you don't work through those expectations, if you don't manage the emotional side with the sort of just the logistics, and get that commitment and help them understand the benefits that they're going to receive by going through this process and getting to the other side of it, then you can't get through the change management of adoption any more so than you can get through the change management of onboarding. And I strongly believe that change management is as much about the emotion as it is about the actual steps that you need to go through for change.
Right. And sometimes there's another party involved, right? Like maybe a Salesforce consultant that the customer is engaged, or some other partners that need to be on the same page. How do you work around that?
Well, I mean, and that's something then, if you don't have alignment, then you need to come back and bring the parties together and check in with them and say, hey, it doesn't look like we're aligned here, and maybe you have that conversation initially with the executive stakeholder who originally purchased it, or maybe, you get everybody in a room to discuss that. But if they're not going to continue on track, if they're not going to all, play nice and cooperate and that sort of thing, then they need to make that decision together to decide that they're not moving forward in the way that they had, basically agreed to when they signed on to purchase the product. And then that's very much an at-risk situation, right? That jeopardizes everything. So you really want to make certain that they are thinking, cohesively together on their side. And, there can be politics, there can be, or sometimes it's just other priorities. Things happen in a business and they have to decide to put something on hold. The problem is then inevitably they'll want you to compensate them in some way for their business challenge. And that's where then you have to sort of work through, how much you can really do on that side. Because and that is really important, and that's part of how the onboarding team then is a major factor, because not only might it have a contractual impact, but then also it delays whatever expansion or adoption and expansion that the customer would be doing and would be on track to do with their cohort. So anybody else who signed on the dotted line in that same month, they're moving ahead and progressing, they're expanding their business, they're adopting the product and doing all these other things. Now this company is further behind, and that impacts also the resources you're putting towards it. It has an impact all the way around. So as much as possible, you want to try to avoid getting into a situation like that. And if you're in a situation like that, that's all hands on deck. That is where you escalate and let the executive team that you're working for know what's going on with it, because that should be out of the ordinary. That should not be like, oh yeah, that happened to another customer. Then you're in trouble if you're letting that happen left and right.
Got it. A couple of approaches I've seen, and I'm wondering if you have experience with either of them, or if you have a belief of which one works better. One is to say, hey, we're going to charge you for onboarding hours and you bought like 40 hours for the first month. And if you need to carry into the second month, these 40 hours are going to expire. And the other is to say, hey, your first month is going to be like a free implementation that we do for you. But if it goes on into month 2, then you need to pay up. So have you seen either of these in action, and which one would you recommend?
So it's interesting that you ask about charging versus free month, because I've definitely seen both approaches, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And I think it's a little bit about how it gets framed and prepared with the customer, but also it can be part of the psychology of the pricing in the marketplace. Certainly if you have competitors in the marketplace who are not charging who are charging, that can affect the psychology of your customer. But regardless, you want to find a way that they are going to basically have some skin in the game, and that they're going to, to find a sort of a partnership with you in the process, and that you're going to successfully onboard the customer in the most productive, successful way. I mean, that's really the whole point of it, whether you're charging or not. Because even if you charged for your time, if the onboarding isn't successful, then you have an at-risk customer. And so that's against kind of what your real goal is. And so let's say you don't charge for it at all, and you have a successful onboarding. That, in a sense, is more valuable than if you charged or didn't charge and didn't have a successful onboarding, right? You can certainly make the case that if you're charging for it, that they are going to feel more beholden to it, more responsible for it. But you can also sort of, work with the psychology on it. You can say, we're going to charge for it, and let's say it really only takes 2 weeks to onboard. You say, we'll give you the first 30 days free. If you finish it under 30 days, then we'll refund your money. That then incentivizes them to get it done and even get like 2 weeks free. Or to, if they have complications, that they'll still get it done within the 30 days and be successful at it. If you have a more complex onboarding, and it's taking longer than, something, 2 to 4 weeks, it is more common to charge for onboarding. They do expect that, in a sense, because they understand that you're having to invest people and time and that sort of thing. But you still need to work through a way to incentivize them to be a partner with you in the process. That's why ultimately I always go back to the success plan and how the executive stakeholder is involved. But ultimately, whether you charge or if it's free, it's really about the psychology and the partnership is what you really are trying to accomplish, and making certain that you have a productive onboarding. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So we now move to our next section of the podcast, which is a rapid fire section.
Okay.
So you're gonna answer with like the first thing or person that comes to mind.
Okay.
Here's the first question. A habit you picked up in 2021 that you'd want to continue in 2022?
Definitely, I've been reading books regularly. And that's something that I've really enjoyed. So I've continued that throughout 2022. I also, as you can see in the background, have a couple of cats, but I don't think you can call that a habit.
Yeah. Any books that you recommend?
One that really was impactful to me is So You Want to Talk About Race? Aluo, sorry. Really bad with the pronunciation on her name. But that was just a really compelling book. And I still think about it. And actually, I think I might do like a book club around it or something, because it was just a really great book to read.
Nice.
Yeah.
What comes to mind when I say customer?
Partner.
Okay. And what comes to mind when I say metrics?
Well, it's a couple of words. I always think about leading and lagging metrics. There's no one metric that I really think about, because I think that metrics are sort of changing in what metrics you want to use, depending upon what you're sort of working on. And but I think it's important to understand if it's a leading metric that's going to help you as you're working towards something, or if it's a lagging metric that you're going to measure afterwards. So that's kind of the key to me.
Cool. We also have one question from our community pre-flight. So here we go. How do you ensure you keep things on track with customer initiatives without annoying them?
Yeah, because you could sound kind of nitpicky or, poke, that sort of thing. Again, I think that comes back to the partnership. I think that comes back to where you have shared goals, shared vision to begin with, that you try to ensure that comes from the executive stakeholder that they're reporting to, so that it's not like they're doing you a favor for their own onboarding. Like, you want to be sure that it feels like we're working together towards this goal. And if that's the case, then, if they have like a major catastrophe that comes up that prevents them from doing something this week, then you can decide to do that, like delay in partnership. Whereas if it's like where they just don't feel committed to doing this onboarding project, then frankly, there could be a delay every week, So yeah, I think if you have that sense of partnership, when you're reaching out, when you're checking on one task, to the next objective, to the next milestone, that it doesn't feel like it's poke. Instead, it feels like, yes, and look at this, we're getting towards this goal together. And I think that makes all the difference.
Awesome. That's a great answer. We're sort of done with the questions here. One piece of advice you would want to share with a reader who's going through, similar journey as you today.
I think what's been top of mind for me is managing through the great resignation. I think some people also refer to it as the great reshuffle. And that is just that when you have these challenging times that you need to work together on internally as a team, and you're trying to hire and onboard, and if you have people leaving the team and then you need to hire more and onboard more, like it puts a strain and stress on the team that is, by definition, all sort of gathering around and trying to help bring new team members on. And so if you have more people leaving because it's harder to do everything on top of bringing new people on, then you just have this sort of constant cycle. You can't afford to take people for granted. And I think that, when we're all trying to buckle down, we're in startups and we're all trying to get through this sort of, fire together to get to the other side to build this great product. Sometimes if we're willing to do that, sacrifice, then we think like, oh, everyone wants to sacrifice. The problem is when you have all these other jobs and higher pay and the promise of, the grass is greener, then you might end up losing some of your own team members that you value, because, hey, they just got offered this other gig and looks pretty good over there, so then that just puts more strain. So I think that's a big thing to remember. And if you're going through a cycle like that within the team, because there is a lot of transition happening in CS teams and CS leadership right now, then it's important for the executive team to know, hey, we have all this stress and strain on the team. You've got these big goals. You're trying to get to this next level, series A, B, C, D, whatever. And this is going to impact it. We can't do as much as we were planning to do this quarter because we have to build out our team all over again. And I think that's really important to communicate to the executive team so that you don't have more pressure, more goals thrown on top of you when you're just not going to meet it. Plus, then they don't have the surprise thrown at them when you haven't reached the goal. And I think so often as leaders, we'll think, oh, I just have to, work that much harder I'll just do more work. I'll just, we'll still get there. I want to be a team player and help us all get to that next series, whatever, and get our quarterly goals, at the same level as they would have been. Sometimes you just have to say, no, it's not going to work. We're not going to get there. We need to adjust to make certain then that your team has the support and the time and the relief to do all of the added things that they need to do when you're dealing with that great reshuffle. So that's been my big lesson of this quarter, and something that I wish I'd done more of.
Got it. Cool. Amazing. This was great, Jan. Thanks for having this conversation with us.
Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun and a long time coming, and really excited to have had this conversation with you.
Awesome. Thank you.